Good morning, everybody. Welcome to our webinar on gendered market mapping. We have 10 people online at the moment, and Brenda is sure that some more of the EDP staff will be joining us. So our process today is we hope to get through an agenda, which I'll share with you in a second, in about 40 minutes and leave some room for questioning and so on. But during the course of the webinar, if you have burning questions, please type them into the chat box, and Alistair, who's masquerading as Vincent the presenter, will keep a track of those and feed them through to me, or I will feed it through to Alistair when he's presenting, so that we make sure that you end this hour-long engagement with us understanding a little bit more about market mapping and how to use it in an EDP context. So I have to say that up front, because the webinar is about creating more awareness and sharing the tool essentially with EDP staff who really work at an enterprise or firm level, as opposed to GEM that works at a market systems level. So we've tried where we can to, and I'll share some ways in which we think this tool can be especially useful for people who work in our EDP program. So we can move to the next slide, Alistair. So this is how we'll do it. I'll do a short rationale, and then as you can see, Alistair's name is plastered all over the rest of the agenda. I'll try to answer questions about why we do this and why is it relevant. And a lot of what Alistair has to share is about how we do it. So sometimes when we immerse ourselves in how we do things, we often forget why we do it. So I'll try and act as an anchor to bring it back to why we do this and why it's important for EDP. There's a question and comment section, and then the EDP team, Fabian and Brenda, will share some ideas about what they think could be some of the next steps. Okay, Alistair, let's go. Next slide, please. So rationale for gendered market maps in EDP. I've got a few slides to share, just some introductory remarks about the tool itself. So the way we use market mapping is central to the way we do markets-based programming, and it is a participatory approach in which we try and look and in a simple and visually engaging way at communicating and sharing knowledge about complex systems. And this is, you know, it's done with specialists and non-specialists, because at the end of the day, if you want to intervene, everybody needs to be on song, clear about what we want to do and so on. It can't just be done in a room with specialists. So the aim of the market map is to quickly build up a comprehensive sketch of the market system in its entirety. And you will see as we go through how we do it, it's quite a engaged process that requires some work up front before you can do this successfully, but don't let that put you off. So the purpose, this is the generic purpose for market maps, is to collate and represent information about market systems, to facilitate discussion and interpretation and analysis of data within the teams, and to communicate the findings about the market systems to others, especially those that we want to work with us. So on the next, in this slide, you will see a strategic framework. Now this is adapted from Johnson & Scholes, and it doesn't really matter how you craft your strategy, hopefully not on the back of a cigarette packet. I don't know if you can do that anymore with these cigarette packets today. But the strategic framework that you see before you, it helps you think through an array of complex strategic issues. And because this is a tool we want to encourage EDP to use, it's based on a firm and it's based on an enterprise. We look at the three key elements within the green square, and you'd see that there's a logic to it. So you first need to analyze something to understand the threats and opportunities, and based on your analysis you choose some options, and then you set about implementing those options, and you worry about things like structure and management systems. So this is happening, but it's not as neat as it looks. It's all molded together, and there are interactions across these various elements. And one of the key reasons why that is so is if you look around our shaded area, you'll see what we call the four pressures that are pushing in, literally pushing in on the firm all the time. You have issues relating to the industry dynamics, questions about how things are changing and how does it affect our firm. You have issues about what is acceptable risk to the firm. You have issues about internationalization and the extent to which the firm is impacted by its markets. And then the issues about ethics, social responsibility, and how you respond to these. Sometimes you have no options. Government, if you're in a certain sector, might mandate that this is how things happen in the sector. And all of these things are pushing in on the firm as it tries to plan and deliver to create profit for its shareholders and decent jobs for its employees, and hopefully keep management on their toes. So the reason why I presented this in this way is to suggest to you that market mapping, if we go to the next slide, Alistair, is especially useful when it comes to how you can deal with these four pressures we spoke about earlier. So for instance, if you look at, wait, I'm just doing something funny with my screen. Right. If you look at the first one, pressing in industry dynamics. Now, if you're doing strategic planning for a firm or so on, you would be familiar, EDP staff and people who work with firms, due to things such as PESTEL, where you look at the external environment, or 4 or 5 forces, depending on which one you want to use. So there are many ways in which you can try and understand what is changing in the industry, and how do we use that information to adjust or change or go after some of these opportunities that emerge because of what's happening in our industry. So we will say to you that market mapping will help you identify some of those drivers. So if you look at the next pressure pushing in on a firm, is about risk. And one of the risks we want to put to you when you're looking at EDP investments is the opportunity to understand risks such as the issues around female workforce, issues around supply chains where females as workers or as producers are embedded in the chain, but in a precarious way, so much so that these could actually be huge risks unseen if you use some of the conventional tools that your firm might be faced with. If you're in an environment where you're using or relying on fish or honey or something like that, so much of the downstream businesses that supply your whatever processing package or whatever plant you're investing in are areas where women producers, women-owned businesses are in the majority. So you need to understand, and the market map is going to give you an opportunity to air these, to see them for sometimes the first time. The next area that we say to you that market mapping is really useful is when it comes to globalization and internationalization. It might come as a surprise to you, but some studies suggest that up to 70% of small firms are engaged in an export chain, and they don't even know about it. So this would be good for you to understand it, and I want to make the point that, you know, industries and markets globalize, not countries. So you might say, oh, between this country and we're only going after national markets. And that's what you say. But what is the reality? What is the truth about that industry and about that market? So the mapping process asks you to take a deeper look at those either disabling or enabling environments that push in on your firm. And the last one is ethics. So ethics and values affect decision and the ability to implement these in accordance or conflict with stakeholders. And I would say to you that from where I sit, an investment by Oxfam or its supporters carries with it an expectation which is about trading fairly, about engaging with poorer producers and so on. So you need to understand these, and the map will help you to identify and respond to these. So in this short section, what I've tried to do is give you the rationale for why this is important for you in the context of what you as EDP have to do around understanding firms and how to help navigate them through tough environments, especially in the earlier phase of their lives. We can come back to these during question time, and perhaps look at ways in which we can make some of what you'll hear now from Alistair more relevant in the context of what I've just shared. So thanks everybody. I'll hand over to Alistair.
Thank you, Roland. Hi, morning everyone. Just to let you know who I am, I'm the Monitoring and Evaluation and Learning Officer for Market-Based Livelihoods and Gender at Oxfam GB, and so work in the GEM team with Roland and Miranda here in Oxford, and also I've also been doing some work with Brenda and Fabienne on the EDP as well. My slides, okay, here we go. So just as a bit of introduction, you may well have heard of this, but the GEM toolkit is basically the gender market map makes up part of this GEM toolkit. But just to introduce you to this, you can find it at gemtoolkit.org, and it's made available to support Oxfam and partners in country to design robust market-based livelihood projects and programs. And so there's a selection of tools that bring together good practice on how to collect and analyze and integrate information applying to Oxfam's gendered enterprises and markets approach. We still have some improvements to make to the website, specifically around the gender market mapping tool, but we'll be adding and amending to the website over the next couple of months, so keep an eye out there, and you can go there, and the majority of the tools are there now. So on this slide you can just see an overview of the 12 different tools that make up the GEM toolkit. And of these, we have kind of a core 7 that you can see in the orange boxes that we use in the diagnostics phase of a GEM program. So today we're focusing on the gender market mapping, and you can see where it lies in the flow of the use of the tools. So in order to talk about gender market mapping, before we get there, we need to talk a little bit about market selection. So just going to do a very brief run through of this tool, but you can go to the gemtoolkit.org and get the guidelines to run this tool. So for market selection, it's basically the idea of this is to get a short list of markets that we're thinking of working in and value chains. So we start by, oh yeah, I was just to say here, obviously with EDP enterprises, often these are already selected, and the enterprises that you work with, they have specific value chains. So this step may not be necessary, but it's good to give you a quick overview of how this works. And also having data from the rapid care analysis and the vulnerability risk assessment tools will help you here in order to select value chains that are suitable for inclusion of women producers and workers, and value chains that also take into consideration the local climate context. So I'll just go back to the previous slide. You can see here we also use rapid care analysis and the VRA, the vulnerability and risk assessment, to feed into the market selection process. So the first step in this tool is to prepare the long list of value chains. So in order to do this, you need the data on the impact group, so who it is you've selected to be working with, and begin adding information on potential markets, look and investigate what markets are currently around and utilized and where there is potential for growth, reviewing the literature. In the next slide, we'll go a bit more into detail quickly to show some examples. And then the next step, say you've come up with a list of 10 or so value chains that you're thinking could be could have good potential to work in. Then developing some assessment criteria in order to rate the different value chains and score them, so that we can understand which value chains are going to be most appropriate for the context. And again, I'll show you a bit more about the assessment criteria in the next slide. And then the final step is about shortlisting the market. So once we've assessed the criteria, you're coming up with 2 to 3 value chains that are coming out top of the ranking of the criteria, and then we'll select those to then go into the market mapping exercise that will generate a map for each of those value chains. Okay, here we go. So this slide, hopefully it'll come up on your screen, there we go. It just shows you a couple of examples of the ranking exercise of the different value chains. So in the green boxes at the top, you can see the target group. So if, in this example, we've selected 2 target groups that we're thinking about working with. We've got some market-ready producers, and we also have some landless workers. So we're going to, obviously, these value chains may rank differently according to the criteria for those different groups. So we need to have an idea of that. Good. Okay, so the value chains, as you can see, listed along the top of the row, and we've chosen 6 criteria to assess them against, which you can see there. These criteria, in the tool, there's a lot more explanation as to how you may want to rank them and the information that you need to inform those choices in order to be able to make a score. But then essentially they're scored by giving them a mark out of 10. As a group, you can agree collectively or individually. You can all assign a score that you think is relevant for each criteria, and then do that for each value chain and tally them up. And then you can see the scores at the bottom, and the ones with the yellow boxes are the 3 ones that have come out the highest. So it's a very brief run through of how to do the market selection, but just wanted to give you that introduction before we go on to look at the market map. Okay. Good. Okay, so we're going to run through this example of a market mapping exercise that we did in Tajikistan on the tomato value chain. We did this over a couple of days with the Tajikistan team, with the Oxfam staff, and with partner staff. Now, it's better really to involve a bigger, so I was just reading the chat box, better to involve a larger group of stakeholders in order to get all the right knowledge in the room. So you could include other than just the partners, you can involve the larger stakeholders, market players, business owners, government representatives, and local community members and producers and representatives from the communities, in order that you've got a bit of a bigger perspective to build into everything. Okay, so very quick introduction to gender market mapping, other than what building on what Roland's already mentioned. So this market mapping is an analytical exercise to better understand the wider market system within which women and men smallholders exist and need to engage with to improve their livelihoods. So the important thing to remember is this isn't just about developing a nice looking map, it's about the discussions and the decisions that come out of the process. And so this first step is to make a draft outline of the value chain and documenting all the pathways of the product from input supply through to the consumer. In this step, it may be easier to have a smaller group of people, maybe the Oxfam and partner staff and the enterprise, and take about a day to map out the initial value chain. Okay, so in these photographs here, you can just see two initial attempts at documenting the value chain. As you can see, it's all a bit messy and not as so neat and tidy, but it shouldn't be. This is a very kind of as-you-go process. And let me just...
Alistair, can I just come in?
Yes, please. Yeah.
So as Alistair has shown there, you have to map out this value chain. Hopefully you would have some prior knowledge, perhaps even a value chain that was done, for your industry or sector to work with. But it really is about how it is from where you're sitting. And once you can tidy this up, the involvement of stakeholders will make sure that at least there's an agreement on how it is. Now, depending on the EDP firm, you'll probably find yourself in one or other generic part of that value chain, either right up front in producing the kind of inputs that might be needed, seed production, or you think of a few others, or as producers making something. And many of GEM's target groups are in the producer area of the value chain. I suspect EDP will find itself more at higher levels of this value chain, in the trading section or around logistics, or maybe even as the processor and the institutional firm getting things to end markets. So it's important that you understand the whole of your chain. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Roland. So obviously you start mapping out this process, can take up to a day or so, but you should end up with something that looks a bit like, it's really waiting, okay, here we go, to like this. Basically at the end of the day, someone needs to go and transfer all of that information into an Excel template. We have plenty of these examples available from different value chains, so we can give you those Excel files and we can make a blank template that you can use and adjust. So it can be a bit fiddly, but it's fine. So you'll see this is basically what came out of the discussions that we had in Tajikistan from the initial mapping. Just a point for trying make sure that the linkages don't overlap, because sometimes they can look really messy if you've got lines heading all over the place and it's difficult to follow. We need to see which linkage leads from where to where. And there is actually something wrong on this map. I don't know if people want to, can anyone see an unintentional error that we have in this map? And that's an open question. Can people hear me? Good. Okay, anyway, well, I will continue. Basically, if you look at the processors, we have the local national processing companies, but there's no linkage from them anywhere. So we're missing a line. So in this value chain, they would process and then they wouldn't send it anywhere. So obviously we were missing a key linkage there somewhere. Good. Okay. So step 2. Step 2 is about adding a lot more detail to the map. So the starting point of this is to explore all the surrounding functions, services and norms that affect the value chains, but are not directly involved in the product. So the quick rule for the value chain, if the player touches the product, so for example the tomato seed, the tomato traders, tomato paste processor and canners, the transporters, warehouses, and exporters, retailers, supermarkets, and you when you're in the kitchen, then you're in the value chain, and then everything else is surrounding it. So at Oxfam, obviously in the role of market facilitators, we're not only interested in the core value chain, but in all the little details around it. We want to try and manipulate the blockages and the barriers in these systems and make the value chains more effective and profitable for poor producers and workers. So this step helps us to understand all the surrounding pieces, and you can see some of the key headings in this diagram. So under the disenabling environment, we have things such as gender roles and behaviours, social norms, quality standards, land rights, and then in the services we have things such as natural resource management, technology, finance, and business development services and transport. So this step, we look into these areas in more detail, and this is better to be done with a few more people again than at the previous steps, so that you can get that information from the local producers and from workers and from business owners and government staff. Okay, so this is just a quick couple of slides to show you some of the thinking that we came to in Tajikistan. In an example, we went through each heading under enabling environment section and went through it to think of different barriers and enablers that were relevant to the tomato value chain. So for example, you can see under the heading gender, we have a positive sign for some of the women accessing mobile legal clinics and information. And then we have a negative for women unaware of their rights. So remember, and as we're doing gender market mapping, we're often thinking about this from the perspective of poor women producers or workers within the value chain. So we need to think specifically how these barriers are affecting women producers and workers. Don't just leave these issues to the gender column. So, you know, for example, there may be barriers related to infrastructure that affect men and women differently. And on this slide, we can see the supporting services and the same. We went through the same process. There's no set way of doing this. In Tajikistan, we split into, I think, 3 groups working on different headings. So you can do that or work as a whole group. Anyway, it's just can test out different ways of doing it. And then at the end, again, someone needs to write this up in Excel to present in the map. Oh. And then there we have this final map. So that's what it looks like when it's all together. But obviously, as it is, this is not really that. I mean, it looks nice, but it's not really that helpful in itself. The idea is that we're going to develop some interventions based on this map. So, Roland, do you want to add anything?
So, Alistair, just before we move on to how we, distill this into something useful, again, just to emphasize, for the firm, the EDP firm in its industry, this is really useful information. Just to tie it back again to our sort of strategic framework. From here will emerge a deeper understanding of some of the more hidden things within your value chain, your firm's value chain. Some of the issues which, and there's a question on value chains which we'll answer later, but if you look at the value chain that Alistair presented, there's an attempt, and there should be an attempt, to try and put some volumes and values and pricing to this. And when you do that, I mean, you as a firm, it will almost your risks and your pressures will almost become a guide to where you go next with your strategy. This an enabling environment again, if you look at what or where we go with this, and if you look at it from a women empowerment perspective, and many of the value chains are absolutely, you know, a chock-a-block full of women producers, women laborers, and so on. You can see that some of these risks, these minuses and pluses, need to be addressed, else they become a stumbling block to your firm's success. So when you look at an exercise like this, you know, again, think of the pressures that are pushing in on your firm and see to what extent some of these risks need to be mitigated, or some you have to maybe decide a specific course of action that you wanted to take as an enterprise is simply not possible. And even from the value chain, you can see if the profit opportunities are really low in certain areas, it might not be the right place to be in. So it's useful even at this level. So what Alistair will do now is he will explain to you how we go from here to where we identify interventions and then put our resources and structures in play to meet those interventions. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Yeah, and just to add one more thing onto this step, which this is also the step for gathering a lot more information. So you can come up with this initial map with your group, but there may be questions and things you don't know as you're putting it together. So this is an opportunity to go away, find out that information, come back and adapt and update this all of this information so you can put that. And as Ronan said, you know, put a lot of the information about price in through the value chain. And numbers of producers that you're aware of in certain sectors. So just to add that. Okay, so step 3, it's a good idea to remain with the same larger group of people because we're going to start coming up with intervention ideas in this stage. So we do this by going back to each barrier we identified in step 2 and coming up with different activities that would help to address the barrier. So I'm going to we'll go back a couple of steps. So we can try and do this. I'm not sure how participatory this is going to, successful this is going to be, but I'm going to pick one of these barriers. So we'll look at the quality. In the quality column, we've got soil quality is poor, diseases and pests prevalent, dusty, dry and hot weather. So I want you to come up with some ideas for what we're going to do. Anyone? Even Roland. I feel okay. Well, maybe this isn't the best way of working this, but you get the picture. Basically, you go through one by one through each of the barriers identified, and you're trying to identify what interventions would be an appropriate response for those. So that's the first step. So you can see it's very methodical, but it also generates hundreds of possible intervention ideas. So the idea is to come up as for as many as you can, all the ideas, don't reject any at the moment, even if it seems like really over-ambitious or irrelevant, note every suggestion down and put it down in this Excel sheet just as a list. Again, there's different ways of trying this. You could do it in smaller groups or individually or as one larger group and coming back together to discuss all your different ideas. Okay, so okay, there we go. All right, there we go. Step 4. Hopefully that'll come up on your screens. Okay, so the final step is to start prioritizing these interventions. So obviously we can't do everything, and we want to do everything that everyone's come up with. So we use 2 criteria for assessing the interventions. You can add more if you like, but the ones that are suggested in the tool are to assess it against its feasibility for potential to change, for the potential for the change to be achieved, and also on its impact. So if it was achieved, you know, what scale and significance would the change be? Again, similar to the market selection.
Sorry, Alistair.
Yeah, please.
Sorry, Alistair. Just on the prioritizing ideas for intervention. So you could, for instance, from an EDP's perspective, look at something like profitability, or if you want to get really technical, earnings before interest and tax, or something to that effect. And you could also look at things such as, you know, the social impact, because obviously all our investments in EDP have a strong, you know, social underpinning. So you could change those, as Alistair said, and you know, applying exactly the same thinking. You know, is this going to work for this firm that we're investing in? And you could actually think of quite a few criteria. That's the word I'm looking for. Thanks.
Great. Yeah. So, and the idea is then to use that criteria and as a group go through and score them as you see appropriate, and then add up those, tally those scores to get the total score. And then ranking them highest to lowest, you should have a list of all the suggested interventions with the most suitable ones at the top. You then need to obviously decide how many of those interventions you actually do and work out the sequencing of activities, but this tends to form part of the intervention design stage, and we have a tool for that as well. So some of the maps that we have actually put some of the selected interventions onto the map, as you can see in these green speech bubbles here. We didn't end up doing this in Tajikistan though. So you can then use these maps as a planning tool on an annual basis. You are readjusting the maps according to changes in the value chain players, or changes in linkages, or changes in the identified barriers, and then rerunning the intervention ideas and selection exercise to see what new ideas may now be relevant. So that's a way. So you can either use it, you know, as a diagnostic tool before a program, or use it on a regular basis throughout. It's also maybe interesting to have a set of maps over a 3-year period just to see how that's changed during the intervention time. It would be a nice monitoring tool. So I think that's about it, a very quick run through of the tool. We have a guideline that we're just working on amendments now, but obviously we can give you this presentation as a guide as well, and a template for the tool so that you can use the mapping tool in Excel. But yeah, we'll have a Word guideline ready soon. To help you through the process. So really now the floor is open just to anything that was unclear in any of that, any questions or any comments you have, or any experiences that you have of doing this type of exercise before in a different way or the same way, and what you think of it.
So thanks, Alistair. I just want to add in also sort of closing remark from my side, and then take the questions. I think it's really important that you understand what are the drivers in your industry in which your EDP investment is happening. You also need to understand how this is changing, and what does it present for you. Is it a risk? Is it an opportunity? The market mapping tool, as we said, with its focus on diving deep into the value chain and into the different environments and support environment, does give you a better chance of understanding the sort of hidden risks, as it were. And we certainly think that by using this in conjunction with a lot of others, it will help you to choose some strategies, some approaches, and some actions for your enterprise, which will set it on the right course to profitability. Thank you. Okay, Alistair, we have a number of questions that have already come through. Do you want me just to present these to you? Let me just go back. So the first one I could see. Apologize if it's a little bit if I've missed a few. Is from Donna, and this is about value chains are necessary before carrying out the market mapping, and the suggestion that we do some value chain training for EDP staff, as everybody might not be on the same level as understanding value chain development, and this is a prerequisite for the mapping. So what do you feel about that, Alistair?
Yeah, I mean, this is something we can discuss. I think it would be a good idea, but yeah, we need to understand what exactly the training requirements are. So I think it's a question that we need to work out between us and yourself and with Brenda and Fabienne, I think.
I was trying to speak there. Brenda wants to know, a question is, as you can all see there, they want to use the tool to capture change in the market as part of the MAL strategy. How often should we repeat the exercise to capture that change?
Sorry, this is really tricky, trying to read through the questions at the same time. Roland, can you reply? Can you respond to the question?
That's a nice throwback there, Alistair.
Yeah,
how often? So there are two things that I think that are important. The market mapping as part of the firm's own investigation and constant surveillance of its external environment. I think you do that as often as you sense change in the air. In fact, it should be one of those constant things that is part of your strategic management of an EDP enterprise. Then at a level higher than at the EDP level, I think, and I think Fabian is alluding to it, we might have to do a sort of national industry value chain once a year at least. And possibly it could be related to the enterprise that is being invested in. So if it's just fisheries industry or fisheries sector, the firm would have to constantly surveil its environment, and the market mapping could be good for that. But then I think at the program level, it would be useful to at least align it with some of the reporting, rhythms, either quarterly, 6 monthly, or annually. That's the best I can think of at the moment. Thanks.
Yeah, sorry, I'm back up to date now. My chat box was tiny, and I've seen there's all these comments here that I hadn't seen before. So now I am organised and know what we're talking about. Yes, agree with Roland. I would say, it's quite a lot of work to go through, so doing it quarterly might be a bit much of a ask, but I think certainly on an annual basis it'd be interesting, give it enough time for things to change a bit and keep track. But, the important thing is that it's done at the diagnostic stage so that it can feed into the intervention design. Really, that's the main point where it needs to be used, and then the follow-up, as and when you see fit, as if you find it to be a useful tool. And then, yeah, I think in response to Fabian's question, would it make more sense to do this exercise in full for every EDP country and place enterprises in these maps? Yes, I think so. I think obviously per value chain, but and then also there's a decision about how regional you go. So is it a particular area you're looking at within, for example, in Tajikistan, we just looked at one province because there were lots of different processes throughout the whole country, obviously. So we have to kind of decide where you want to focus the intervention and the value chain. Joe's question, who will lead this process? Do you recommend getting an external consultant to facilitate? What about investing on market research specific on the identified value chain? I did not see you mention it. Yeah, so good question. I think that this is easy enough to do without getting an external consultant, but you also, if you have the resources available, then you can do it. It's not as in-depth as a big value chain study, so that's something that if you want to do, then yeah, probably a good idea to have a consultant in to do that. But I think this is relatively straightforward in terms of being able to run it as a group. I mean, we did it in Tajikistan a couple of days, myself running the tool for the first time. So it's something that you can run yourselves if you want to. Roland, anything?
So can I just, can I just come in? I think there's been a lot of, just in response to Joe first, there's been a lot of energy being expended, including by our colleagues in West Africa, on trying to get to grips with value chains per se. And the importance of that is, of course, if you don't understand or know the value chain, it becomes difficult to then do things like identify interventions that can, overcome some of the challenges or barriers in those value chains that are stopping women from women producers or women in precarious work from stopping them from getting the kind of support that will change their situation. So I'm not sure, but what I've always done in the past is asked an external person to do an in-depth value chain. So for instance, when I did the work for care in Myanmar, before we even went on to deciding what kinds of interventions and so on, we asked a value chain expert to come in and look at it without the sort of care eyes, because then you're looking for things you want to see, So it's sometimes not because we can't do it, but because it may be best to just get an external expert to look at it. It might be good to get the value chain done externally. But certainly once you're happy that you and your stakeholders are happy that you have a good representation, a good model of the value chain, and that all the big pieces are in place, then applying the market mapping approach, at least you're doing it confident that your foundation is correct. But I would suggest, and Donna's also asked the question, that we do all get to grips, if you want to do this kind of work, with value chains. And there are so many online courses, and in fact in the new toolkit we're looking at how we can be a little bit more specific about knowledge and skills around value chains. Thank you. So Fabian, one for every country. I don't know. I think you certainly have to do one for every value chain. For every value chain your EDP enterprise is embedded in. And I think the usefulness of that would be primarily to ensure that you understand all the risks and you're able to mitigate those and to unearth some opportunities, but that the profitability of the enterprise is a driver for that. And as an exercise, knowledge of the sector beyond the industry might be good to know, but I would say for me, if you have a strong why, and the strong why in the case of this is that the company can be more profitable because it does value chain mapping, then you and your staff and everybody that is interested in making that enterprise work has got a much more invested sort of, you're much more invested in trying to make this happen. So I'm not sure about that. Shafiq, you wanted to know, are you promising to do this, Shafiq? Are you there? Have you left already? So you're going to do a market map for your EDP project. Well, we look forward to helping you with that. And I think it's good that you do that. I'm sure Brenda has some comments and Fabian to make about that. Thanks.
Also, yeah, just to, I think Fabian kind of responded to that a bit further down with a good question. So just a couple of, there's quite a lot of comments. There's an interesting one here from Vincent Trousseau, which is not me. I see two ways in which this is useful for EDP. As discussed, it can help you to understand the broad operating environment, which will impact on how a viable business will be and what can be done to improve in the context of the enterprise. And the second way is to be used in the reverse. So if you have a market program like GEM, market mapping can help identify parts of the market where constraints are linked to lack of viable enterprises. Potentially then a program like EDP can assess if there are investable propositions in that segment of the market. In this way, EDP...
That's excellent. That's a really good idea about GEM in a way, and there are many examples where full-on markets-based programs actually are used to generate what we call deal flow for specific private sector and sometimes even government or quasi-government investments. So yeah, that would be a way to align and to make GEM useful to EDP as well. Thanks, Vincent, for that.
And then just to tie, so there's one comment say, to capture the changes happened in this, is this tool user-friendly? Actually, it takes relatively longer time and in-depth analysis to capture changes. And then there's one from Fabian, two from Fabian, but then one at the end says, EDP team, what do you think? Would you rather do more thorough analysis of a few relevant value chains at the national level every year or so, or do the mapping exercise for each enterprise as we prepare proposals? So that's something really to feedback to you guys, and feel free to come on the mic now. We've got 5 more minutes, so it'd be interesting to hear you rather than us just reading through lots of comments. There's a few more comments. One was about asking about the time for Tajikistan that it took. So it only took us 2 days to do this process. It was in a very small team. It was only about 7 of us, of the Oxfam staff and partners. So to do it more thoroughly, the tool suggests a week, and then bringing larger actors together and giving you time to go away and get the information to the questions that you have that have come up as you're developing the process. So about a week of getting a few different people together, and of those, maybe 2 to 3 days of a much larger group of stakeholders. Yeah, and then the costs related.
Sorry, Joe's comment as well. Thanks for that. This is Joe's comment that this is a strategic planning tool. Correct. I think for me, personally, it's the best way to conceive it as part of the companies or the firm's strategic tools or toolbox, as it were. Agreed, Joe. To be regularly reviewed based on changing context. Even if one of those 4 pressures we spoke about earlier, if one of them changes, it literally causes you to rethink all of your key elements. It drives you back to analyzing, back to choosing a new way for your firm, and back to thinking about how to implement it properly. So it's got to be reviewed constantly. Thanks.
Good. So I've just seen that it's actually John writing as Vincent. There seems to be, it's like a John Malkovich scenario going on here with Vincent. But okay, so I think I'd like to pass over quickly to Fabian and Brenda, or anyone actually, just to hear your thoughts, just to close us out really. It's putting the buck on you quickly, but just thoughts into how this may be useful for EDP.
Hi, this is Fabian. Can everyone hear me?
I can, yeah.
Great. Wait, I assume that's valid for the rest as well. First of all, thank you, Roland and Alistair. I think this was really, really helpful. Also a great update for me. And I really keep this question in mind because for all EDP countries, we did a scoping study that was looking at relevant value chains, and there was some analysis done, maybe not in depth and not following this methodology, but it might be really useful to redo those and have that as something dynamic that we can work with, and as I said, place enterprises in that. So we'll think about that a little bit more, and then I think that it looks like the team and also from our previous conversations, Brenda and I are keen on doing these market maps at the proposal development stage. But for that, I think we're going to be limiting it probably to steps 2, 3, and 4, obviously, because the value chain would have been already defined by the enterprise. So there are 2 stages that I think we can make use of this. And again, it will be really useful to have the templates just to also standardize the way we go about this. And hopefully that can also make it easier for teams to work on it and more efficient. So thanks a lot. This was really helpful. I'd like to hear more from Brenda and any others who want to join.
Okay, if there's no more inputs, anyone want to say anything before we draw to a close? Time is now. Okay, I think Brenda's can't connect, so let's just pass on. Roland, do you want to close us out with some final words of wisdom?
Thank you. I don't know if it's wisdom, but I'll certainly do the closing out. So, okay, just to reiterate, the market map is an integral tool for GEM. In the GEM context, it helps us to really isolate, find, and deliver on good interventions. And as Joe has made a comment that we also need to look at countries like Nepal, Bangladesh. Yes, there are many examples. So honestly, if you want to see what's been done with 3 or 4, we can send it to you to help you with your own market mapping. So the bottom line is, how does this work for EDP? And I think we've now seen some evidence through the questions and through Fabian's comments that it is useful. I would just like to emphasize that any enterprise, its strategy, how it does things and why it does things is integral to its survival. EDP enterprises need to make a profit, but they also have a social obligation. And we feel that the market map, and we can work and develop it and work on it collaboratively for EDP, a specific tool around this for EDP. I think it will give you a competitive advantage vis-a-vis other sort of patient capital investors and so on. It will also help you to align more directly with what Oxfam stands for, our DNA, which is women empowerment. And there'll be no uncertainty because it's embedded now in how EDP thinks about the firms that it invests in its markets. So yeah, thanks everybody for taking time out to listen to us. This is being recorded, so Al, Norman, and a few other people who might have had some audio problems, please do take advantage of the recording once it's available. And yep, Alistair will help you in any way he can, and I will make sure he does. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Cheers.